So thanks for the invitation, and to Jenny and Neil for organizing, and obviously you for coming. I should get started by saying that this project was generally supported by the SRC. It's joint work with CINI at Cardiff, and it's based on a paper that's currently under review. Okay, so what we'll go through today is sort of from setting the scene, then I'll discuss the data, and then creating the multidimensional index, discuss some of the findings and some sensitivity tests, and then discuss how to possibly make sense of the results, and then leave some Q&A. So I'll first locate the topic in the broader literature. So over the past 2 decades, the world of work has experienced, as many of you have know, significant changes driven by globalization, deregulation, and digitalization. And while the expansion of the gig economy has provided new employment opportunities, it's also increased flexibility for some, but created more precarious forms of work for others. And so in this evolving context, job creation alone is increasingly regarded as insufficient. So quality of work has gained increased prominence as an essential concern. And COVID-19 has further underscored this importance of job quality by highlighting stark contrasts between what we term good and bad jobs. And this has tangible effects on both employees and organizations. So for example, at the individual level, research indicates that employees in high quality work environments experience greater job satisfaction, improved physical and mental health outcomes. But from an organizational perspective, a good quality workplace also benefits from enhanced productivity. Poor job quality work environments can also lead to higher turnover for companies, which lead to organizations to face increased recruitment and retraining demands and contribute to higher costs. So improving job quality, and I define it by borrowing from Green at UCL, the aspects of jobs that contribute to meeting workers' needs from their work has attracted increasing attention in many Western societies. So for example, at the EU level, you've had the EU Lisbon strategy framework for investing in quality employment. You've had the Laken indicators, which have represented a key effort to develop a system of job quality metrics. You also have the sustained focus of the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions that further underscores this commitment to enhancing job quality in the UK, and perhaps Bruce might touch on this. All constituent countries have signaled the national commitment to improving job quality. You have localized efforts as well, so in Manchester, in London, but more broadly, at the sort of higher level, the industrial strategy also emphasizes its commitment to high quality jobs for all citizens. But evidence has indicated that access to quality jobs is stratified along racial, ethnic, and gender lines. So I'm thinking about work here by Sveisin, by Demirova, by Buey, and by Florison. And so while gender and ethnicity have examined in this context, I argue that religion remains an overlooked axis of inequality. And this is puzzling because a substantial body of research indicates that certain religious minorities, and particularly Muslims, and especially Muslim women, face multiple forms of employment disadvantage, a phenomenon commonly referred to as the Muslim penalty. So I'll just briefly sketch what the Muslim penalty is. Obviously, I won't go through everything because it will take a while. But just to give you an idea, so Lindley, for example, in 2002, assesses differences in earnings and unemployment and finds that what she terms a quote-unquote Islamic penalty remains even after accounting for human capital differences and English language deficiency, such as English language fluency. Anthony Heath at Oxford and Manchester, and Jean Martin back in over a decade ago now, assessing inactivity and unemployment, find that both male and female Muslims are likely to experience the most severe economic disadvantage in the labour market relative to their co-ethnics who have a different religious affiliation and no religion at all. Nabil Khattab and Tariq Maudud, their 2015 work really sort of pushes, enhances our understanding of the Muslim penalty, because they essentially posit that there's an ethnic penalty is in fact a proxy for both a black and a Muslim penalty. So importantly, that the penalty varies across ethno-religious groups. So not all Muslims are impacted in the same way, and neither are all black groups. And my last paper in 2002, I find a Muslim penalty in unemployment and inactivity for both men and women that cannot be explained by so-called socio-cultural variables. So overall, in a nutshell, long-standing research reveals entrenched ethnic and religious hierarchies, with Muslims experiencing a persistent Muslim penalty, even after accounting for socio-demographic and human capital factors. But the key point is that this research has largely centered on employment access, neglecting issues of job quality as a crucial yet under-examined dimension of labour market inequalities, despite, as we discussed, its significant organisational and health implications at the individual level. So this paper seeks to address this gap in the literature. So before we can examine these differentials, we need to understand what we mean by the term by job quality, and this helps inform the operationalization and measurement in the study. Broadly speaking, sociological research on job quality follows two main strands. The first, which has been dominant in social stratification studies, basically equates job quality with access to higher occupational groups and earnings. So managerial and professional roles widely viewed as labour market successes, and occupational attainment is commonly used to assess immigrant and ethnic minority integration and broader labour market inequalities. So think about work here like Yao Jun Lee at Manchester, Anthony Heath, and Sin Yi Cheung. The second strand, which is more rooted in the sociology of work and employment, moves beyond income and occupational attainment to examine broader job quality dimensions. So one of the, at least in the US, one of the key figures is Kalberg, so at, if I remember correctly, at UNC, integrates economics, sociological and psychological perspective, and essentially distinguish between these economic rewards and non-pay benefits, arguing that job quality offers key insights into work on organization and social stratification. And in this paper, we really borrow on this, adopt this second view of job quality, but I'll discuss that a bit later on. So in terms of the framework of how we theorize here, so we draw on labour market segmentation theory in conjunction with the concept of Islamophobia to examine Muslim women's labour market performance. So if I unpack that a little bit, segmentation theory challenges this neoclassical view that by attributing labour market inequalities, and I quote, to formal and informal institutionalized policies and practices in labour marketplaces and workplaces. So Doringer and Pure, in their sort of infamous 1971 manuscript, introduced this idea of internal labor markets, and essentially they distinguish between this primary segment of stable, high-paying roles with clear career development opportunities, and then there's this in parallel secondary segment of low-wage, insecure positions with limited advancement prospects. So building on these insights, our analysis essentially adopts an expanded segmentation framework, and it recognizes three occupational classes: routine, intermediate, managerial, or managerial and professional. And this approach essentially enables us to examine how Muslim women's labor market experience vary across a polarized labor market. And in conjunction, a critical addition to this framework is Islamophobia, defined, and this is based on my definition, which is in a paper that's out later this month, the hatred of Islam rooted in a long history of religious demonization that, through doctrinal falsehoods and distortions, constructs Islam as inherently malevolent ideology. This framing enables the depiction of Islam as an existential threat, thereby legitimizing hostility towards the religion and towards Muslims, as well as those perceived to be Muslim as a racialized group, seen as its agents or embodiments. So that's how we understand, how we define Islamophobia in the paper. And research has shown that Muslim women encounter Islamophobia in ways that are particularly shaped by gender. So visible markers of Islamic identity, such as the hijab or what is termed modest clothing, rendering them particularly vulnerable to targeted attacks. What's interesting is when you look at the literature, there's all these sort of, I mean, I use interesting loosely, but contradictory stereotypes that depict Muslim women as both passive and submissive, but also a threat to Western culture. And empirical evidence shows that this affects their employment prospects. So, for example, there was a study by Reyno, who was at Oxford, was an experiment in Germany, Spain, and the Netherlands, and they find this hijab penalty that it intensifies in customer-facing roles. Iman Abdel Hadi also finds a similar hijab penalty in the United States, which is particular to Muslim women who wear the hijab. And then Choi and colleagues in a really interesting paper in 2023, document significant discrimination against Muslim women who wear the hijab. They argue that, and this is important, that the ideational stereotypes shape the structural opposition to Muslim women, and that, and I quote, the hijab makes those assumptions cognitively salient. So within that framework, we have two hypotheses. On average, so the first is that on average, Muslim women experience lower job quality compared to their Christian counterparts. And the second is that the Muslim penalty in job quality is smaller for women in higher status occupation compared to lower status occupation. So in other words, more pronounced in routine occupations, moderate in intermediate occupations, and least severe in managerial or professional positions. In terms of the data used, so to answer these questions, we exploit the UK HLS, which has been discussed briefly, but for the sake of completeness, the UK HLS, which is the UK Household Longitudinal Survey, is the largest study of its kind. It's a longitudinal sample of individuals interviewed within a household context, as was mentioned. Participants are interviewed annually, so starting in 2009 and over a 24-month period. And it includes about 100,000 individuals from about 40,000 households across all countries of the UK. And the reason we leverage the UK HLS is because it has detailed information on job quality of religious minorities in Britain. So there are other, very briefly, there are other data sets which could be used that are very good for job quality, for example, but not for the groups that we are interested in studying. So in this study, I pull 6 waves, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and the reason is because job quality data is collected every other wave. The analysis accounts for the survey's complex design, so weighting, stratification, and clustering, because the UK HLS isn't a simple random sample, so which means that the findings are representative of broader British population. One important technical point for those of you who use the UK HLS or who are familiar with it is that the longitudinal weights provided by UK HLS should only be used when all waves are pooled, as you probably know, rather than every other wave is used. So we couldn't use the waves. We couldn't use the weights provided. So for this, I created scaled bespoke weights, and that's how we do the analysis. In terms of the analytical approach, so as I mentioned, so that there are 2 steps to this. First, I construct a multidimensional job quality index to measure good work across the sample. So essentially, each person gets assigned a score. We focus on employees, excluding self-employed, because the data is collected for employees. And in the second step, we use that information derived essentially as a dependent variable, and then evaluate religious differences therein. I'll discuss shortly how the index is created, but before I do so, just a brief discussion on the measure and the model. So the main predictor of interest are religious, so it's 4 religious groups: Christian, Muslim, no religion, and other religion. Other religion are those faced where there was not sufficient sample size to create their standalone group. So Jews are in there, Buddhists, Hindus, for example. In terms of the model, it's a multi-level model, a regression model. So sort of briefly touched on before in the first presentation. So essentially, you have you have the slope that will also change as well as the intercept. And why is because observations are clustered within an individual, so the data set is longitudinal hierarchical. In terms of the analysis, we adjust for a range of human capital and demographic variables, so from period effects to demographic ones to work ones as well. Okay. So as I mentioned, we sort of measure job quality, which is used as a dependent variable. So an obvious question is, how is this done? To be honest, this is it's a considerable piece of work in its own right, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll only discuss this briefly so we have enough time for the findings, but I'm happy to discuss in the Q&A. But in short, as I mentioned at the beginning, we move away from a unidimensional definition of job quality, so looking specifically at the monetary aspects, and we propose a multidimensional one, which is, as I mentioned, the view of job quality researchers. So a lot of work here goes from leaning on a lot of literature from Warwick, for example. This study employs a data-driven approach to operationalize job quality for use in the regression analysis. So to distill the 21 items into a single index, which are items that we identified in UKHLS based on a review of the literature, we essentially use the EFA, so exploratory factor analysis, and we use the first factor, which explains 62% of the variance and aligns more closely with the theoretical construct. And to facilitate interpretation, factor 1 is then standardized. So it has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. And the idea here is that you get a more intuitive interpretation of coefficients. So differences between groups in terms of standard deviation units from the reference group. So scores above 0 would denote average job, above average job quality, and below would denote poorer job quality. Okay, so in terms of the findings, what do we find? So for H1, on average, Muslim women experience lower job quality than their Christian colleagues. Let's have a look at it graphically because it's easier to visualize. So the figure essentially represents the regression results of the standardized factor 1 score, which is the proxy you'll remember for the overall job quality. So across all models, specifications ranging from the baseline, which is the empty model, to those that include additional demographic and job-related controls, so the last model, the form one, the coefficient for the Muslim indicator remains significant at the 99% level. It's negative and largely unchanged. At the baseline, it's about 2.49 standard deviations lower job quality score. Compared to the overall average. And you'll notice that the effect size for every other group, the no religion and the other religion, are close to 0 and not statistically significant. So indicating that the observed job quality penalty is specific to the Muslim category. In terms of H2, so we find that Muslim women in lower status roles appear more penalized in terms of job quality compared to women in higher status roles. Again, if we look at it graphically, as it's easier to see what's going on. So the figure here reveals a distinct disadvantage for Muslim women, particularly in lower status occupations, where opportunities for upward mobility and alternative employment perhaps are limited. So you'll notice that in blue, so in the routine roles, they experience significantly a statistically significant job quality penalty relative to their Christian peers. So that's the red dotted line. And although the penalty, if you look at the orange circle, in the intermediate roles appear comparably severe, it's not significant. And this might be due to sample size if you look at the graph. But the effect for managerial and professional is less pronounced and also not significant. So overall, Muslim women seem to consistently exhibit the largest negative effect sizes relative to Christians, exceeding those for other groups such as no religion or other religion, although it's important to highlight other religion is quite heterogeneous, so it's difficult to draw conclusions from that. In terms of robustness, so to test the robustness of our findings, we conduct several supplementary analyses. So first we changed the index completely in terms of how it's created. Rather than adopted a data-driven approach, we adopted a theoretical approach. So we created an equally weighted one with the same indexes. Other sensitivity analysis we did was to assess if the findings were sensitive to our coding. So we respecified several key FOV areas from education, ethnicity, industry, but all these alternative specifications produce results that are consistent with our primary analysis, strengthening the finding that Muslim women workers face a job quality penalty. In terms of making sense of the results, I'll just whiz through this because of time. So it's important to highlight that the analysis is not causal, right? So we're working with observational data. And while our conceptual framework foregrounds Islamophobia and its gendered manifestations, which create a discriminatory environment that disproportionately affect Muslim women, prevailing discourses, as I mentioned, depict Muslim women as both oppressed, quote unquote, and a threat to Western culture, quote unquote. And we've seen that there is data from the Home Office that they are the primary targets of Islamophobic attacks. One potential explanation is that Muslim women across occupational classes may encounter similar levels of prejudice, but their capacity to counter this effect varies according to resources, and that would be consistent, with labour market segmentation theory. If you think about those in routine roles, the resources available to those in higher status roles, and that would perhaps be a reason as to making it more difficult of why we see the differences we do across occupational class. An alternative is that Muslim women in managerial and professional roles may benefit from more personal capital to leverage against discrimination. So that feeds into the first one. But the alternative explanation, is that in higher status position, Muslim women may face greater pressure to remove the hijab, for example, and conform to mainstream norms, which diminishes their salience of their Muslim identity and consequently reduces their vulnerability to Islamophobic discrimination, which is the literature, for example, from Choi and colleagues. And there's other literature that supports this. We know that from Schneider in a 2022 paper finds that Muslim employees engage in suppressing their religious visibility in the workplace as a preemptive strategy to protect themselves against hostility. But as I said, there are other possible explanations as well. So self-selection could be one. It's also important that we're not analysis doesn't compare. It compares the overall distribution, right, of jobs within occupational categories. It's not comparing identical jobs, and so it might be that just within occupational classes, Muslim women disproportionately represented in low-ranking positions. Nonetheless, it remains highly unlikely that discrimination does not play a significant role in the observed differences, particularly given the extensive literature documenting employment discrimination. So from field experience, for example, the persistence of the penalty in our analysis, even after controlling for multiple demographic and occupational factors, and also the pervasive nature of Islamophobia in British society. And I'll give you a very brief overview before we conclude. So for example, about 20% in UK in 2017, and I quote, believe that some races or ethnic groups are born less intelligent. Again, about 20% of people in the UK had an unfavorable view of Muslims. That's from Pew. About 1 in 2, quote, would mind if a close relative were to marry a Muslim. In a study by Jones and Unsworth, who Jones recently moved to Kiel, Muslims were, and I quote, the second least liked group after Gypsies and Irish travellers. Work by Ingrid Storm at Manchester and colleagues found that Muslims do not only experience discrimination from the white majority, but also are singled out for unique hostility by other minority groups. The latest studies from the Home Office found that while Muslims account for 6.5% of total population, they represent 42% of all religious hate crimes, making them the most targeted group, and that's actually a 28% increase year on year. And a study of Muslims a survey of Muslims in work in 2022 found that 69% of them reported experience Islamophobia at work. So with that concludes my presentation, and I hope this gives you some idea to think about. I look forward to your questions and comments, and thanks again for your attention and your patience.